This is awesome to do a special session on faith and advocacy, and there couldn't be a better topic, especially this morning after what we just heard. It's one of our really untapped resources is to tap the faith community around public policy and around advocacy, and we've got the folks right here to tell us how to do that, and so I'm going to hand it off to my lovely man, Harry, to take us the rest of the way.
Okay, thank you, and welcome. We're really glad to have you here, and I actually had permission to tell a joke today. So yeah. But I won't do that. You can rest in peace. I think most of these people have heard my jokes already, so I'll have to tell these folks my jokes privately, so that it won't be in public. But I do want to welcome you here, and this is the first time we've really tried to do this. We want to begin to get more of a national dialogue about the role of faith in how we make change happen. We know that a lot of nonprofits can do wonderful things. They can collaborate with the government, but we need to really focus on how we collaborate with one another and in the faith community, and how we as social change agents reach out to the faith community to make those things happen. So we're going to try to do that. Now, we're lucky to have a wonderful panel, and I'm going to introduce our facilitator or moderator and then let him go on from there. We're lucky to have with us this afternoon, as we had on Saturday for our new minister orientation, the Reverend Tommy Dillon. Tommy is rector of St. Aidan's Parish in San Francisco, up in the Diamond Heights area, I think that is. And Tommy used to work with VOA. He spent 10 years working for us, first out of Baton Rouge, and then in the national office as the first director of our prisoner reentry program that we did for about 5 years, I think it was, wasn't it? Something like that. Now, Tommy is a person who really was introduced to me originally as a person who really will set things on fire, and that he himself was once set on fire. So, no, the first thing I ever heard about Tommy was that he was the one in Jackson Square that a firecracker landed on and actually set his clothes on fire. So of all the people around all of Jackson Square and all of New Orleans, it hit Tommy. So it was a sign from God that he should be a firecracker for the faith. So I'm going to turn it over to Tommy now, who has, by the way, I will tell you this too, that when I first visited his church after he had left VOA, we had a meeting in San Francisco, and I stayed over. In fact, a number of people said, oh yeah, we're all going to go to Tommy's church. I was the only one that made it. So, but we get there, and I'm sitting next to a couple who tell me that they had just about given up on finding a church. And they had moved from Washington, D.C., as a matter of fact. One was a lawyer, one was a doctor. They'd moved to San Francisco, and they said they went all over the place looking for a church, and they just about had given up and decided they would just not be anything. And they stumbled on St. Aidan's, and they couldn't believe how lucky they were and what a wonderful congregation it was and how active it was. So that was a really good affirmation for me to know about Tommy's ministry there, which has been phenomenal. It has been like a firecracker. He's really made a big impact both in his congregation and in the local community, doing faith action with the community. So we'll let him talk about that in a moment. So, but for now, the Reverend Tommy Dillon, who is a graduate of Yale and of the General Seminary in New York City, and a former Volunteers of America service coordinator. Well, that's not the right term, but he worked with us in Baton Rouge. I told you that part already. Tommy?
Thank you, Harry. I'm mic'd. Thanks for sharing the story about me burning my britches out. That's a wonderful introduction. I'm very honored to be here, not only with this wonderful panel, but to be back with Volunteers of America. When I got out of seminary in 1996, everything was in my head about my faith. And I had the wonderful opportunity of working with Volunteers of America, of going into the trenches to work with the marginalized of our society, which really gave me a good core of service and ministry going along with my theology that I had learned. And I was a priest that got my hands dirty, and it really changed who I am and who I am today, because many priests or other ministers leave seminary and they go into a congregation, mainly, especially in my tradition, the Episcopal Church, around liturgy and worship. And Volunteers of America gave me that wonderful opportunity to do the work that God is calling all of us to do, that is calling these four wonderful people to bring about the kingdom of God now. And the way we do that is through our advocacy and through our love of God and that interaction with those who are in the margins of our society. So I'm very pleased to be here. And first of all, I'd like to introduce our panel. On my left, I'd like to introduce Angela Williams. Angela is Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Chief Administration Officer of the YMCA in the United States of America. Angela is bivocational. She is both an ordained minister and a lawyer. In 2009, the National Law Journal named Ms. Williams as one of the 20 most influential general counsels in America. And prior to joining the YMCA, Mrs. Williams was the interfaith liaison for the Bush-Clinton-Katrina Fund. Welcome. Second, we'd like to introduce one of our own in Volunteers of America, Ms. Kate Cruz. She is the Public Policy Director for Volunteers of America in Delaware Valley. Ms. Cruz is responsible for tracking legislative and regulatory priorities for Volunteers of America, Delaware Valley, while monitoring important issues and political trends affecting service delivery on behalf of Volunteers of America in Delaware Valley and its clients. In addition to policy oversight, Ms. Cruz works to build relationships with the community, including decision makers, advocacy groups, volunteers, and universities, pertaining to the organization's mission of service through the tri-state area. So welcome. And then on her left, we have the Reverend Dr. Luke Torian, who's the pastor of First Mount Zion Baptist Church in Dumfries, Virginia. He's also a delegate to the 52nd District of the Virginia General Assembly. In June of 1995, Dr. Torian was installed as pastor of First Mount Zion Baptist Church in Dumfries. Dr. Torian's leadership, caring, and involved style of ministering to others has been instrumental in First Mountain Zion's growth from 650 members to a congregation of over 4,000 members. In November 2009, Dr. Torian was elected delegate to the 52nd District of the Virginia General Assembly, which includes many counties of this area. Welcome. And then on his left, we have Terry Lynch. Terry is an executive of the Downtown Cluster of Congregations here in Washington, D.C. Terry is responsible for program and issue development, community relations, fundraising, administration, and public relations. Mr. Lynch has helped to establish service programs and address major economic development and community revitalization issues. The agency has grown from 12 members to over 40 congregations, and the assets have grown from $3,000 to over $900,000, which is a wonderful increase. But before we go on, I have something for Terry. I want you to answer a question. I have heard through the Washington Post that it says that Terry Lynch is Washington's most annoying man.
It's true.
Could you tell us a little bit more about why they gave you that wonderful title?
They wanted to sell papers.
Oh, yes.
The reporter is Paul Schwartzman, that reporter who I've known for a number of years. I work on a lot of city issues here in town in different ways. Paul's always looking for a story, and the Post had wanted to do a story on what I do. And so they looked at the various, I do a number of different things, and they decided they liked my hobby. My hobby is I walk around the city and call things in, have graffiti removal, trees planted, publisher boxes, U.S. But basically, when I've got a couple hours, I'll take a couple hours out, I'll go around, and I'll come up with 30 or 40 service items to get fixed. So he decided to do an article about that. So he had fun with it.
Well, sounds great. Good work, good work. Well, before we go on, since we're talking about advocacy, I would like for each of our panelists to share with the group, what is your definition of what advocacy is? And we all come from a faith background, so tell us a little bit what you think advocacy is.
I come at it from both the faith perspective and the legal perspective, having been a trial lawyer. And so one of the things I always say when people make fun of the fact that I'm a lawyer and an ordained minister, and my grandmother used to call me a liar, that I think it all works together. And when I think about preaching the word of preaching the gospel, and when I'm in a courtroom advocating, it's the same thing. It's about connecting with people, inspiring them, and convincing.
Thank you. Kate?
So for me, advocacy is simple. It's about stories, and it's about empowerment. And it's seeing a problem and coming up with a solution, and then working towards whatever that might be, however you can. It's not giving up. It's empowering others to be part of the solution of whatever the problem is that you've identified, and telling stories, energizing people around that issue, getting people excited.
Great, thank you.
I think when you are a person who's been placed in a position of influence, then you utilize that influence to empower others, and also to bring resources to individuals who may not be in a position to advocate on behalf of getting those resources. So both from a church perspective and as a state delegate, I'm certainly in a position where I can give voice to using resources to help those who don't have.
Mm-hmm. Terry?
I think the answer's been given. Just to reiterate, is from my perspective, is using the power that the faith community has. The faith community has a tremendous amount of power, but they don't always know how to use it. They don't know how to organize it. And for me, advocacy is having the congregations, the faith community know how to use their power on behalf of those who are left behind, left out, whether it's new immigrants, whether it's people who've been in prison, whether it's youth, whether it's those who are powerless, using the faith community to empower and work with and partner with others to achieve an objective. There's got to be an end goal, and you've got to achieve it.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to have you tell your story about how are you serving as advocates in your communities? And why don't you start, Terry?
Advocates in our community, I basically do advocacy on local city issues in Washington, D.C. So we try to identify from our clergy, our member congregations, issues that are timely and issues that we think are a powerful moral message. An item I could suggest right now that's coming up is the last summer, for budgetary reasons, the city government eliminated in-person visits at the D.C. jail. So we have a couple thousand families that are impacted by that. They can no longer visit in person people at the D.C. jail, and it was done for a budgetary measure. And many of our congregations have prison ministries, reentry programs, and find that social support engagement with families is critical. So basically, we have organized to say we want, yes, you can have video visitation, but we want in-person visitation for people at the D.C. jail. And so we've networked clergy and people in the reentry program. We got a city council member to put in a piece of legislation mandating to restore it as an option. The bill's coming up for a hearing. We have clergy testifying at the hearing, affected family members, and that's next week. So it's taken a year, but it was eliminated last year. We worked with the council, got a bill in, and now we're testifying next week. So that'd be an example of identifying a key community issue and networking our ministers and those impacted to do something about it.
Great, thank you. Luke?
What we have done over the last couple of years, each year in our ministry, we have a ministry theme. So for the last couple of years, it has been ministry beyond the walls. Within the local church, we do a lot to minister to our own congregation, but we decided that since we have grown so much, it's now time to focus on what do we do for the community. So each of our ministry, when we do our annual budget, they have to put a ministry project in their budget where they go out into the community and partner with various organizations and connect and build relationships and meet the needs of whatever organization is that they choose to support both financially and through service as well. And that's been a tremendous help for our community.
Well, to follow up on that, so you're a delegate to the Assembly of Virginia,
Yes.
but you also pastor a church of 4,500 people.
Yes.
How are you able to do that? I'm just wondering. I mean, it's hard enough to be a pastor of a church and then to also represent the state.
Much prayer.
Much prayer. Like, how do you juggle your time, and does it work well together? Or is there much tension in
Actually,
your role?
4 years ago when I decided to run, back in 2009, we had a church meeting and I shared with the congregation, this is what we're going to do. And so we had some concerns. How are you going to do it? I said, well, we have good staff. We have 21 people employed on staff. I have a good leadership team. And after being elected and going to Richmond for my first term, things just worked well. The staff, they know their responsibility. They're expected to carry out their responsibility. I have a leadership team. They know what their roles are. I expect them to carry out their roles. And they recognize that my service in the General Assembly helps us as a congregation as we seek to serve our local community and the state at large.
Great, thank you. So Kate.
Well, what drew me to Volunteers of America at the beginning was this idea of love plus advocacy, that you have to be speaking out in order to be serving people holistically. So advocacy is a big part of what we do, and we have a team set up to work on advocacy issues and efforts and campaigns. A lot of what we do is government funded, so we have to be really paying attention to those funding streams and the people who are making decisions about what we're doing. So a lot of it's relationship building is just the base of what advocacy is for us, is really working with the community and also community leaders so that they know what we do and why we do it and the importance of it. So a lot of our advocacy is just educating and teaching people what we do, why it's a benefit. It not only benefits people's lives, but it also helps the community, it saves money. So a lot of it's relationship building. We do some campaigns throughout the year. Right now we're kind of in the trenches of budget season. So we're dealing with all of those changes that are coming down. We see a lot of cuts, and so we're trying to figure out ways to advocate for ourselves, share that voice and that story of it's not just a funding stream, we're not just a number in your budget, we're lives, and it matters.
Great. Angela.
And the YMCA, similar to what Kate's saying, we are in 10,000 communities across the country, and we touch 21 million people a year. So, and pretty much most of the Americans are within a couple of miles of a Y. So when you think about that, we really take a look at the communities that we serve. We do community needs assessments. We then want to make sure that we're relevant. We organize our Ys regionally through the states. We actually create what's called state alliances. We have our Ys do community benefit toolkits and provide the numbers and the stories. And then we make a concerted effort during recesses, for example, the August recess, to have events at our local Ys to invite candidates or actually those that are in office from both sides of the aisle or multiple sides to come in, to visit, to share. We create agendas. We always believe in collaborating with others as well. The YMCA has 3 areas of focus: youth development, healthy living, and social responsibility. In the healthy living, for example, we have a program called Pioneering Healthier Communities, where we bring the mayor of a city, we bring all the local stakeholders, all nonprofits, corporations to say, how do we make our community healthier? It could be advocating for a sidewalk so that kids have a safe way and path to get to and from school, or advocating for a bike park. It's those things that are just that simple. And it's about connecting and meeting the needs of the community and bringing everyone to the table to have impact.
Thank you, thank you. You know, there are events in our lives that change us, that the people that we meet, the events that we experience, that push us towards our passion in life. I know for me, when I finished seminary, I worked at a soup kitchen in New York City at a church called Church of the Holy Apostles. Now, being a person from the South who had never worked with the homeless population before, I met a person who was transgendered, living with AIDS, homeless, you know, the most marginalized person you could ever meet, who one day, when a person who couldn't get into the YMCA room when we were giving out vouchers came up to hit me in the face, my friend stood in front and took the hit for me. And that person became an image of God for me and changed my life, and really pushed me to be an advocate for the marginalized. And I was wanting to know if each one of you could share a personal story about some moment or some person where it clicked for you and where you might say, this is where God is calling me. This is my passion. This is what I feel like God's calling me to do. And I know, Kate, you and I talked about earlier that whenever you saw the description for your work with Volunteers of America, you said, oh yes, it has my name written all on it. So if you might want to start about what was it that drew you to Volunteers of America, but what might have happened before that to draw you into the work that you're doing now?
Sure. I think I was always an advocate. as a kid, I was very feisty. Sassy is what my parents called it. When I was a little kid and I was sent to my room, I gave them the whole list of my rights of freedom of speech, and you can't lock me up. And I was onto something at an early age, that there was injustice in the world, and I was about to fix it. So it kind of grew with me as I was, aging, and my parents really instilled that value in me of service. I grew up in a fabulous church environment with leaders around me who did amazing work in places like Haiti and Peru. I had wonderful examples. So I went from, being the little kid who organized a neighborhood cleanup with my dad's help, and I was around 5 years old. I realized what homelessness was on my way to my mom's work in Philadelphia, and she helped me organize peanut butter and jelly drives to take with her to work. So it's something that I think has just been in me from a very early start. But as I got older and I went to school and I studied issues of injustice, I went on to work in a juvenile detention facility with kids it was their last stop before prison. And pretty much a lot of people in society would write them off. They're just troublemakers or whatever it might be. But I started to see patterns in their lives. Why are so many kids from impoverished areas ending up here? Why are so many kids who have a parent incarcerated ending up here? And I started seeing systems that are in place that impact people's lives. That really is what got me to go on and pursue an education in policy, because there's these policies and these structures that we have in place in society that impact people's lives and their ability to grow and to have equality. And so that's really what brought me there, and I've been really lucky and blessed to find places to encourage me in that, which is why when I saw the Volunteers of America job description, I called up my boss and I said, this is my job.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, Dr. Torian, as a pastor, as our Pentecostal brothers and sisters might say, what set you on fire to do the work that you're doing? What was that calling?
I'm not sure if I can go back to one particular incident, except when I was in college and I made a transition in life and accepted Christ, and then my pastor said, go to seminary. So, okay, I'll go. But I was not interested in church work, ministering in church, because who wanted to get up every Sunday and be in the pulpit every Sunday? That wasn't my thing. I didn't want to do that. So I worked with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes for a number of years. And after about 8 years of that work, God changed my heart and said, it's time for you to go into pastoral ministry. He really gave me a heart for it. And I said, okay, I'll do this, but I'll do it under one condition. You send me to a place where everything that you've given me, I can pour into that congregation and empower them, and we work together to make a change. And so in 1995, he sent me to First Mount Zion. And we have grown tremendously and the church has become the model in our community for reaching out and partnering with other organizations to make a change. And then in 2008, immediately after Mr. Obama had gotten elected as our president, my wife and I were very concerned about the political climate in our community. And we're sitting there and we said, we need people who are going to make a change in our community. Things can't stay the same. And at that time, the 52nd District seat became open. The guy who held the seat was not going to run. So she looked at me and she said, well, we're always talking about change. It's time for us to make a change. You need to run for office. And that's how I got involved. And so bringing both ministry and the political environment together has helped us bring change within our community in a tremendous way. Empowerment. I am such an advocate for empowering people to see their potential and what they can do. Matching potential with resources and faith. Man, that drives me 24/7. I mean, I'm loving it. Real quick story. We had a tornado come through our community a couple of years ago. Trailer housing development was virtually destroyed. People of color, Hispanic community, they were housed in the YMCA for about 5 days, 5 or 6 days. Then the county said to them, you've got to go. We can't keep you any longer. Where were they going to go? about 100 people, maybe 50 families or so. And we got a phone call from the Red Cross and asked if we could help. And we have a wonderful facility in Prince William. And so we opened up our gym. We brought those families, we housed them in our gym, they used our facilities, we fed them, we fixed them hot meals 3 times a day, every day, for 7 days until we worked with the Red Cross to get all those families housing. That's what we do, and that's what we love doing. And I'm just excited about it.
And it's the right thing to do.
And it's the right thing to do.
Terry.
A lot of factors come into play, but thinking about going back, which is a long way back, about 30 years ago, I was a student at Georgetown University. That's how I ended up here in Washington to go to university. And I was living on Prospect Street. I don't know, you may know Georgetown was kind of the Tony part of town at the time anyway. And I was living in a house, and there were 2 things happened sort of simultaneously. I was living on Prospect Street, and there was a homeless gentleman who frequented my block and around the corner, who I got to know fairly well, number one. And also around the corner was a Catholic church, Holy Trinity Church. And Holy Trinity Church was about to undergo a multi-million-dollar renovation. And some friends of mine who I'd gotten to know through some work and mutual friends, a gentleman named Mitch Schneider here in town with Community for Creative Nonviolence, Carol Fennelly, Harold Moss. 2 things happened at the same time. One is, unfortunately, the homeless gentleman that I knew when I was a student, it was over the Christmas break, he died of exposure there in Georgetown. Very, the juxtaposition of living in one of the most affluent, white, powerful centers in the country, and here's this gentleman who was homeless on the streets and died of exposure, who I knew personally. And at the same time, around the corner, my friends engaged in doing a hunger strike, saying that instead of renovating the building with millions of dollars, that should be going to homeless ministry. So I would say those 2 sort of events were happening at the same time, and that pushed me into homeless advocacy, which I started doing homeless advocacy, ended up founding a shelter, working with the homeless, getting students organized to do help for the homeless in a lot of different ways as a student. And I did that for a number of years and got to know the local clergy, which is how I ended up in this job. But I would say those 2 events are my personal factors that influenced me.
Thank you. Angela.
I would just say, growing up as a preacher's kid, and you're almost born into the notion of service. And when I was younger, my dad was the head of the NAACP for the state of South Carolina. And so in the 60s, he was very active and worked with MLK Jr. And so I always used to hear in the background these conversations about civil rights and hear my parents talk. So I always had this notion as a kid of I'm going to be a fighter and an advocate for the underdog. And so I've been able to do that through the course of various jobs that I've had, and even in corporate America, I still feel that there's room for us to serve. And when I was actually ordained, you meet before the council and they want to say, what has God called you to do? And I told them my place of work is marketplace ministry. I think there are some of us that are called to the 4 walls of the church, and I have to say now that I'm a pastor, but before that it was like my ministry is in boardrooms, my ministry is in corporate America, my ministry is on Wall Street. And that's where those folks need God just like everybody else does. And so that's what I've been doing. So all spectrum of people. I minister to, and I love the ability to be able to flow from the person that's in foster care or in a shelter to someone who's the CEO of a Fortune 500 company.
Is there one person that you've met that you can say was really an inspiration for you in your work?
I'd say my parents, because they have their whole life served. My dad then became a Navy chaplain, and then, since they retired, my parents found their own nonprofit, and they're advocates for children in South Carolina. Then some of these kids still have outhouses. They don't have indoor plumbing, and they're advocates for them to be able to stay in school and get a good education. They expose them to different things such as the arts, and And they just try to help them to graduate from school and go on to college so that they can break the cycle of poverty.
Thank you. Earlier in the day, we had a panel here. I think most of all of you were here, discussing about veterans. And I was wanting to know if any of you all could share some stories about your experience or your organization experience of working with veterans in the work that you do.
Sure.
Yeah.
We just
Kate.
opened a beautiful new veterans shelter in Camden, New Jersey, which we're really excited about. It's wonderful, and we have a whole holistic range of services that we provide in that one location. So we're actually working to transition them, meet them where they are. So a lot of shelters don't take people if they have addictions. We meet people where they are. We recognize that there's past traumas and histories that are impacting someone's ability to heal. So we have really a great method of treatment, and then we're helping people transition, find jobs, meet their mental illness if they have it, or addiction problems, and then transition into permanent housing and employment in the community. So we're really excited about that.
Great, great.
The YMCA, one of the things, we have lots of camps around the country, and so in partnership with the Sierra Club and some other Department of Defense funding, when veterans return back home, they can come with their entire family to a camp, a Y camp, and they get mental health counseling. They have specific programming for the family and for the children, and they help them get reconnected before they get back into their routine. So that's really exciting work.
What we've done, we have partnered with area veterans agencies and invited them to come to our church to share with veterans what benefits are available to them. What we've discovered is that a lack of knowledge has hurt a lot of our veterans who have returned and who are wanting to understand, well, really, what is being provided for us. So we've gone through a great deal of information sharing, allowing them to know what resources are available to help them in their daily lives.
Thank you.
One of our projects is we have full-time, professionally trained social workers on staff who deal solely with doing outreach to hard-to-serve, hard-to-reach homeless people who are living around federal buildings, in doorways, in parks. And unfortunately, an undue percentage of those are veterans. And getting them basic services, everything from, treatment for an array of issues that they may have, health or substance abuse issues or mental health issues, getting them identification, applying for benefits. It's an A to Z approach, but a lot of times the very first step may take months, if not years, which is establishing a relationship where they're actually willing to talk or engage with the staff, the hard-to-reach homeless. And unfortunately, as I said, an undue percentage are veterans.
Recently I was at a retreat of our governing body of my congregation at a retreat house south of San Francisco. And I would have to say the people on our governing board, they're all in their late 50s, 60s, and 70s. You might want to call them the frozen chosen. And the other half of the retreat center was full of the leadership in the Bay Area for people with Habitat for Humanity. And everyone there, they were all in their 20s and 30s. And we're like, what are we not doing, Here I am, the youngest person from our group, and I'm 43. Where are the young people in leadership roles? And it's great to have you here, Kate, as the youngest of all of us here. Yeah, cherish that. But what do you see in people your age that's drawing people to do this advocacy work? Because I think those who are millennialists are drawn to this advocacy work at a different level and rising up in leadership roles than many of us who are Generation Xers. So if you feel comfortable, if you could share a little bit about your experience.
Sure. I agree. I think that there's this excitement around advocacy and justice, and especially in the faith community. There's a whole movement of justice and faith right now. It's very popular. I think we had great leaders. I mean, think about what was before us a little bit. All the major civil rights movements, women's rights, Native American rights, disability rights. We have this whole history that we've been able to watch and want to be a part of and engaged in. We have a lot more opportunities now, I think, and the education is increasing. People are more aware. I think technology has played a role in that. Now we can see what's happening around us. It's not just what's in our own community. We're seeing globally, we're seeing nationally these issues, and we're empowered. We have these great leaders around us that have told us or showed us, you can be involved in this. You can take action. Your voice is important. And I'm really excited that panels like this exist and this movement is becoming more and more accessible for people.
Right. Well, Angela, I mean, the name of your organization, YMCA, it has the word young in it. So
Men too.
Young men, yeah, well, Young People Christian Association. How are you leading change about getting younger people in leadership in the work that you all are doing in the YMCA?
Two things I would say. One, as it relates to civic engagement, we have a program called Youth in Government, and that's for youth ages 14 to 17. And it allows them to learn about democracy, speech making, making change, advocating for issues. And then secondly, we've just really gone back and taken a look at who we are. Our mission statement is to put Christian principles into practice through programs that build a healthy spirit, mind, and body for all. So what does that mean in 2013? And how do we really strengthen communities? So we're now talking about being a cause-driven organization, an organization that is really a movement and reinvigorating ourselves. And that means as the largest employer of youth in this country, especially during the summer, with lifeguards, camp counselors, et cetera, how do we teach them about being cause-driven? What is cause-driven behavior? How do you relate to other people? And we want even our front desk clerks, our lifeguards, to form relationships with other people. And in a technologically advanced era where tweeting, texting, and emailing is still better than face-to-face conversation, we're trying to break that mode and say it is about relations, and it's about building relationships and building trust and talking to people. And that's the only way you can do that. You can't really do it in tweeting, can you?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Torian, I know in my congregation, when we have younger people coming in as new members, we no longer send them to a boring class about theology. That comes later. What we do, we hook them up with different groups to do service work and to get them out in the field to work down in the tenderloin, to serve food, to clothe the naked. And doing that with other people does build relationships, and it builds a trust, and it builds the relationship around a mission. And then we go into the details of it afterwards. So what sort of things are you doing in your congregation?
This past year, last summer, we took 30 of our young people to Jamaica for a missions trip. Now, on this trip, they could not take cell phone, iPad, none of the technology. None, zero, none.
And I bet they didn't go through withdrawals.
No, actually, they did not.
They did not.
We worked with a couple of churches in Jamaica, congregations with minimum resources, helping to improve their facilities, provide meals, things of that nature. And an interesting thing happened. After each evening, each day of service, we'd come back to the hotel, and we would kind of debrief and talk about the experience. And one of the things, one of the comments that was shared by one of our young people, she said, "I'm glad that I came because it has given me an opportunity to get to know my peers. We are in conversation. We're talking to each other." And so what we try to do through First Mount Zion and ministry at First Mount Zion is to have service-oriented ministry projects for our young people, to let them know that you're here for a purpose. It's not about you, it's about your service to other people. We have an outstanding youth ministry this coming October. We're partnering with an organization entitled Feed My Starving Children, which is a global missions outreach ministry. We're bringing 500 of our members together for an 8-hour session of preparing meals that we will then send out, and our young people will have a significant role in that project.
Great, thank you. Terry.
I think the points that you touched on are so true about the young. They're really, I find they're looking for real experiences, and they're looking to socialize and network. I find usually they're a lot smarter than myself or my colleagues as well. So the key is for us, what we try and do is, in D.C., I assume as many other places, both our high schools, our colleges, they have a lot of community service requirements. So we're fortunate. We're able to, I try and personally sit down and meet with people who are interested in doing community service with young people, so I get a feel of them, get a sense of them. Where are they going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15? How can I plug them into the kind of ministry or experience that best suits their personnel, rather than just a large group experience, right. Let's say serving a soup kitchen or something. We try and give them a real experience where they actually see a change happen. For example, had a young woman who I said, okay, I met with her, kind of quiet, kind of shy, put her to work in her own neighborhood, reporting graffiti or dangers in her own neighborhood, and there was a broken sidewalk, right, a couple doors down. Disabled people live in a house nearby, and it was a hazard for them, and they came and fixed the sidewalk. So she got to see the real result, and her father said to me, you know what, they came and fixed this. My daughter called it in, fixed the sidewalk, and this house of disabled people, they'd have to, it was very hazardous and dangerous for how they were negotiating that. And so he said to me, what a great experience for her to see she could actually make a difference in her own neighborhood. So that's the goal for me, is to assess folks and put them into doing something where they see a result.
So they're following in your footsteps, and maybe one day they'll be an annoyance in the city of D.C.
Exactly. It's a great career.
Change is never easy. And in this time that we're living in, where resources sometimes seem scarce, and especially in the nonprofit world, what is your experience of leading and addressing change in your organization? Because it's never easy. And what's worked and what's not maybe worked so well for any of you. And this is for anybody to share your stories. Angela?
One thing I would say is collaboration, working together. You can't solve a community problem as a one-off. And there's power in pulling the resources together. There's power in the different perspectives on an issue, and coming together to solve things. I feel like it's like the widow's mite. It doesn't take a whole lot if everybody just puts their little bit in and puts it together. Then, or I should say, it's more like the fishes and loaves. That's an even better example. You put your little bit in, and then you can feed thousands. And so I believe that we have to work together. And that's why I loved being invited to be here, to learn more about what VOA does and to think about where the synergies between the YMCA and VOA. We should all come together and put our monies together, put our talent and our time, and really change this country. We can do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because sometimes we get in a mentality of scarcity and not going into the thinking of abundance. And it brings everybody down. So, having that positive outlook of collaboration is very powerful. Okay?
I would agree with that. And that's part of the creativity that we need in this these times of need. Mm-hmm. We're seeing more and more people who need help. They need resources, need services, and less funding. The budget cuts I mentioned, I feel like they're always coming. So being creative in that sense and collaborating. What are other people doing that are similar to what we're doing? What can we do together? What unique funding sources exist that we can tap into? Are there grants? Are there unique opportunities for us to cultivate new relationships in the community? Maybe there's donors or supporters in the communities that want to get involved with what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Luke?
Whenever we undertake a major project in our community, what I try to do, I have a core group of colleagues mm-hmm. That I meet with on a regular basis. And so when we are having a major project that requires funding, I try to pull those colleagues of mine together and say, we need to work together on this. Just doesn't need one congregation doing this. Let us bring our resources together so that we can make a change in our community. So I very much believe in collaborating with each other. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Right. Just work together. Right.
I would just say, I assume it's for everyone else. I think the last 5 years have been very hard for the nonprofit community, i.e. less funding. A lot of agencies have had to let staff go, cut programs. They have to mm-hmm. determine what is it they do that's essential, that they actually have funding for, can get funding for. It's been very difficult for a lot of nonprofits these last 5 years. And I think the key, many agencies, in some ways it's difficult, at the same time it's healthy, they've focused on what do they do best, and they've been forced to collaborate more. They're forced to network. We just networked with the Catholic Archdiocese, several other large religious groups here in the city on, they want to know how could they help the really poor. Well, the city council was having their budget hearings. We said, let's go get some more funding for housing and emergency assistance. And so collectively, we had top religious leaders go down to city council, go door to door. Boom, we were able to garner $10 million more for an array of housing programs that are going to assist about 3,000 families or individuals. So by working together, we got a big bang, i.e. a significant amount of money for a significant number of constituents. And that happened through networking.
Right. I think that's one thing we can learn through community organizing, is to rally around something together from the civic, the religious, the schools, and the mom and pops, and get things done from a grassroots level. So collaboration is the key here, and I think a lot of us also need to, we talked about this earlier, is about not to worry about the turf issues and to become one body united in mission. Before we go into the question and answer portion, I want to direct some advice from you all to those who are sitting here. I want to get your advice give advice to our audience on effective ways that they can become more knowledgeable and stronger voices as advocates in and for their communities. So here is your audience. How can they become better advocates in their communities?
Get out of your office.
Get out of the office.
That's the first step, yeah.
I am so much more effective when I'm out of my office. The less time I spend in my office, the more I get done.
Yeah.
The more folks I know, the more communities I know, the more site visits I do, networking with resident leaders, neighborhood leaders, civic folks. So it's very interesting. The less time I'm in my office, definitely the more effective I am. And you see what's really going on. You see what's really on the ground. I like to be on the ground, in the corners, on the streets. And that's where you meet people. I get a lot of business done on the street corners. And that's where you can be most effective, I think, by getting out there.
Recently, I had a parishioner come up to me, and she was really distraught. And I said, what's wrong? She said, well, Father Tommy, you're never in your office. And I was like, well, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to sit here all day and wait for people to drop by, answer the phone? And she said, yes. And I said, oh, really? I said, because my other office is like either in like a coffee house, or sometimes I meet with people in bars in the evening, in places where they might feel a little bit more comfortable rather than going into a church. And I said, I could sit here all day, but I'm not really doing the work that God's calling me to do. But it's a lot more fun to get out into the community and to build those relationships and be, if you wear a collar or whatever we do, to be that presence out there to say, here we are as the faith community making change rather than hiding behind the bushel, and putting us on that lamppost to let our light shine.
And when I think about it is, then what you've heard on the rostrum today is about the stories and the personal stories, because that's where you then, when you have stories to tell about impact and how someone's life was changed because of something that you did or your program did, and then you tell that to key stakeholders, to lawmakers, to foundations, to those that can help you with the resources, that's what's really important. Statistics and data are great, but people need a human face and a human story to connect with. And I'm sorry, but tearjerkers are great. As well as this is how we got a bunch of kids together because they wanted a sidewalk and they put together their little group. But just real stories are what really help to change people. They get out of their own minds. Sometimes, as my husband accused me, I live in my head sometimes. And so some of us do. We just get caught up in our routine. We're tunnel vision. I'm task oriented, got to get this thing done. But stop and tell the story and really make it real. Touch people. And in the touching, I think that just opens the floodgates.
I try to do that right before we pass the offering plate. Make them cry. Here we go. Kate?
That's the strategy piece I would talk about. So you have stories and you have strategy. So you need these stories. You need to empower people to tell their stories. It's part of their own healing.
Right.
And it also makes an impact if you can show that it's not just a budget cut or it's not just a policy. It's someone's life, and here's the story. But be strategic about that.
Yes.
It's not just enough to collect stories or march on the Hill. If you don't know who you're seeing, when you're seeing them, if they're in the office, if it's the right office, if it's the right message, it's going to be lost. And I think that's the part that's key, that Volunteers of America is pretty good at, I'd say, is that strategy piece. Last year I was part of a disability rights movement, and it was well-meaning, but it wasn't well-planned. So they planned a march to the governor's house to tell him that the budget cuts were not acceptable. Well, we marched with 100 people with disabilities, some physical disabilities, wheelchairs, in the snow, and the governor wasn't home. And we had no press. So that message was lost.
Right.
So we had these great stories and this great passion, but we didn't think about
Right.
the timing or the strategy piece. So I would say have those stories and be smart about how you use them.
Wonderful advice.
One of the ways that we have been effective in ministry, and this is what I welcome parishioners coming to me with their ideas about things that we can do to make a difference. Because I'm not going to have all the ideas.
Right.
And we have been effective in making a difference when I've had a parishioner come and say, can we have this as a site to feed the homeless? I have with me my Minister of Christian Education, Tracy Hawley, and she brought this idea that there are homeless people living all around our church. We need to open up our church, bring them in, and feed them. And I said, okay, you go do the research, you bring back me the program, and we implement it at our cost, nobody else's cost, but the church. And it was absolutely amazing once they learned that there was a place in their community where they could come and receive a meal. They showed up, you know. And so, be willing to take your ideas to those who are in positions to help make a difference, and then be willing to work. Just don't bring the idea. Be willing to work. Okay, that's what I tell our folks.
Great. Thank you.
I can't add anything. I think you covered it.
Yes. Let's move on to the question and answer phase of this session. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question. We often hear people, you talked about running up to the State House and running up to the Hill. Do you all have any examples of a regular way in which you communicate with an elected official at your program site, at your church? I am really trying to get those of us in Volunteers of America to invite our elected officials to our programs and on a regular basis. So if you could give us some examples of that or how that's worked for you, that'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Luke?
I guess since I'm the elected official, I could give some. It's about relationships. You'd be surprised the number of people who will not come and visit us and establish a relationship and then invite us to their programs. When I go to Richmond in January, we are lobbied all the time. As soon as I walk into the General Assembly building, someone is reaching out, delegatory, can I walk with you? I have something I want to share with you. And as I'm walking to my office, catch the elevator, they're walking, we're talking, and year in and year out, people are willing to develop relationships, and then they share their concerns, and then I've been able to introduce legislation that makes a difference in the community because of those relationships and working with individuals and organizations relative to their cause and their concerns. I would say to Volunteers of America, develop relationships with your elected officials and then allow us to know what your political agenda is. During the months of November and December, I am invited by many organizations within my community wanting to share their legislative agenda with us. And that's how it works.
I know one of the things that we do in my congregation is that we develop relationships with our supervisor in the area, and we have monthly meetings of the whole community in the church. We bring the fire officials in, the people from the police department, and our supervisor. And the area around our church now in the city is called Aiden Zone. And it's wonderful. Even we invited our supervisor to come to do a reading during our Easter Vigil, and he said he would. And then he told me not to post pictures on Facebook because he's Jewish and he didn't want his mother to see him in the church because he doesn't go to temple. But it's inviting them to our events and everything that we do so that we're not just going when it's time to lobby, but it's building those relationships beforehand and getting to know them on a personal level where you can invite them over for dinner, and that's really comfortable. And then you can be who you are. Yeah. Anyone else?
I would echo that exactly. That's a lot of what we do is spend that time, make those relationships, and find ways so that it's not just us coming with problems all the time,
Right.
find ways to partner. So this past Christmas, we worked with a couple offices in Philadelphia to provide Christmas gifts. So they identified to us families that were in need, and then we were able to match them with our Adopt a Family program and provide gifts. That left a lasting impression on that legislator in that district. And it let them know that we're serious and we want to work with you. We want to serve this community with you. That's made a big difference.
Great. Anyone else? Terry?
I would say in D.C., the key for us is making a difference between who's an elected official and who's actually a doer, who can actually get things done. A lot of the elected officials in D.C. can't get anything done. And frankly, they're looking for what they can get from you rather than what they can do for the community. We have a terrible corruption situation in the city. You probably know we had 2 elected officials convicted of crimes last year had to resign. We had an ex-official who just was arrested and pled guilty for bribery. So we have a terrible corruption situation right now with some of our elected officials. So the key is figuring out who in the government, city agencies. We have a great assistant police chief. If we need community policing help, I know I can call Diane Grooms and she'll be right on it. She's not the police chief, she's the assistant, but she's the one who runs the department. And certain at the city hall, there's certain people who know how to get stuff done who aren't looking what can they get from you. So it's a matter of figuring out who's doers and who isn't for locally for advocacy.
Thank you. Another question? Come on. You can ask anything. In the back.
I'm Lisa Daughtry-Weiss, and I'm with Sojourners, and just was wondering, we do sort of faith-rooted organizing training that we offer to whoever is interested, and I wondered if Volunteers of America has anything like that, or how do you help your volunteers to do advocacy? And I also just wanted to mention, in case it's helpful to people, we have a documentary film that's free, that's online, that people can use, that's 40 minutes, great for churches. It's thelinemovie.com that you're welcome to use, that has stories of people who sort of break stereotypes about who's in poverty, and it sort of introduces the idea of government being providing support for those families. So it's for people who are sort of skeptical about thinking that the church can do everything without help. It sort of helps people understand that.
Yes. I actually did the Sojourners training, so that's really exciting. And so I use aspects of that just in the way that I interact with our staff. Right now, it's just primarily staff and clients that we engage in our advocacy. So we teach about structures. If there's an issue, I'll go out to the programs and actually talk about why that's a problem, who it impacts, and how we can be involved. So we incorporate the faith-based aspect because it's the foundation of our company. So I love that idea of teaching people and training people up. So we're really excited. In the fall, we're going to be starting a new program called Give Voice, and it's going to be staff and clients, and of course volunteers if they're interested. We're going to come together monthly to talk about the issues that we see. What are we seeing in the field? What are we seeing around us? What issues are impacting our clients? We want to hear from them. And then talk about structurally, what can we do to make change? How can we be involved in making the changes that we want to see? So we'll talk about making legislative visits. We'll talk about different campaigns we want to do, and then we'll go do them together. We're really excited about that.
Anyone else? Another question? Corey?
My question for the most part, is what do you see as the most overlooked concern not being talked about regarding faith and advocacy in our communities? And what can we do to begin talking about that which we're either ignoring or overlooking?
I think perhaps the biggest challenge that we face in bringing about change is being able to help local congregations and organizations who are about change to come together on a consistent basis, recognize their empowerment, and then to bring about specific change within the community. It's amazing what can happen legislatively if the local church and not-for-profit organizations would come together on specific causes that requires a legislative change. Healthcare, for an example. Education, public education in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We're going through a change right now because our current governor is a big advocate for charter schools. And what we have come to realize is that when we establish those schools, then it takes public education funding away from our public schools. Well, if you're an advocate for education and public education, these organizations should come together and have that as a legislative item that we will address, and we'll address it every year from a budgetary standpoint. But what I like to see, local church, organizations within the community collaborate more intentionally together to affect change.
And I think that it's important for people who have often been enemies, let's say, in the work of justice. You might stand on, get rid of dualism, and you're on this side, I'm on this side, and how do we work together to do common mission of what brings us together? I know in the city of San Francisco, there's a new Roman Catholic archbishop that has caused a bunch of heat in the city because the values of the new archbishop, sometimes people will say, are not the values of San Francisco. And there's this friction going on, and some of my colleagues are telling me, let's just go head on with this person. And I was like, wait a minute, this is another child of God, and he does a wonderful job on immigration reform. He does a wonderful job on all around issues around poverty. I was like, those of us who might disagree with him on whatever issue it is, let's go together and work with him on this and build our relationship around what draws us together. And I think that's what is so important about the work of Volunteers of America. You have people, I know when I did the training for new ministers, you have people who are from very conservative Christian backgrounds, very progressive liberal backgrounds of the Christian church, people who are more of the Roman Catholic, liturgical, people who are non-liturgical churches. And we all focus our work around the ministry of service. It's doing what Jesus told us to do in Matthew 23, to feed the hungry. And I mean, that's simple stuff, but it's very profound. And I think that's what's going to be important in the days ahead. There's so many things that will try to draw us together. And I think that we need to look at what brings us together to do the work of God, and that will bring us about the kingdom of God, I believe. Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's what I would say is one of the overlooked things, and I don't think it's deliberate, is that we're all called to that.
Right.
And sometimes we get caught up in the good things, like showing love and compassion and mercy and meeting people's immediate needs, and we forget, or we don't feel that we're all called to this piece of advocacy. And in Scripture, I don't know how many times the pastors can tell me, justice is spoken of, and advocating, speaking out for the poor, and the judge righteously, and speak out for the needy. Are we doing that? And I think that's the precedent that was set for us in our faith, is that we're meant to call out these religious and political structures and to work for justice, and that we're all going to be part of that, because that's love. If we see somebody who's fallen in a ditch and we help them out of it, if we don't go on to fill that ditch, more people are going to fall in. And we can continually pull people out, but why don't we fill that ditch together? And once we get that we can all do that, and that's part of love and compassion, like you said, we're going to move mountains.
That was the sermon right there.
Preach it. I hope Kate becomes the new Volunteers of America minister in the future. Let's ordain her now. Where's Mike? Question?
In our increasingly secular society, how do we use faith and the language of faith without losing those folks that don't necessarily come from the same place that we do?
So I will say, when I talk about marketplace ministry, for example, I can give a public speech, and it could be all based on biblical principles without ever quoting where it came from in the Bible, because that's really what we're talking about. Even to be relevant as a church, you have to take the biblical principles and say, well, what does that mean in 2013? What are the basic concepts? And those basic concepts, I believe, reach across demographics, they reach across culture, they reach across just everything. And so when we understand at our core what our faith is, and at least from the Christian principle, it's from love God first and then love our neighbor as ourselves, the vertical and the diagonal of the cross, then that's where we meet people. We love God and honor God, and then from there we love our neighbor. And what does that look like in action?
Hey, Christ set the example. Do justice, stand up for what is right, love mercy, and be humble. Yeah, if you just take that theological approach, that I'm going to stand up for what's right, I'm going to love people no matter what their walk of life might be, and I'm going to be humble in what I do, because that was the model that Christ set for each of us. Don't think more of yourself than one ought to, but seek to be effective, because you've been placed in a position to be a change agent and to allow change to come through the talents and resources and gifts that God has given to each of us. My purpose in life is to be a change agent, bottom line. Whether it's as an elected official or pastor of a local congregation, I'm called every day to make a difference. And that's what I seek to do.
Anyone else? Well, thank you all for being here. I'd like to thank our panel. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you, Pastor. Thank you. And this is something that Angela doesn't know about. But Angela, would you close with a prayer for us, please, as we leave this place?
I'd be honored to. Thank you. We could bow our heads. Eternal God, we thank you for this day. We give you all the glory, the honor, and the praise that is due your holy and righteous name. And God, we thank you that you're a God of purpose and that you're a kingdom God. And so we thank you that we are all gathered here today for a purpose, that you have connected us here in the National Press Club building in Washington, D.C., to remind each other that we are here to connect to those that are lost, to connect to those that don't know you or need a touch, a human touch. And so we ask you to continue to empower us to be the change agents, to move outside of ourselves and to touch those that society may have discarded, to reach out to those who are lost along the way, who have fallen and just need a helping hand to move themselves and get back up on the right track. We ask you to continue to anoint us to do your work, to build the kingdom, and to do so with power and might, and most of all, to do it all that we do in love. Amen.
Amen. And may we all continue the gospel ministry of Maud and Ballington Booth to go, to reach, and uplift all people. And that's our charge to you as we leave today. Go in peace, and thank you.